Hello, my name is Wayne Mabry, and I'm going to be presenting gas lift standards for the ALRDC gas lift workshop. So our agenda today is that we're going to develop an understanding of ISO and API document creation, structure, and approval process. We're going to generate standards or understand the standards that are available for gas lift. We're going to list and compare ISO and API documents. We're going to discuss how standards aid in ensuring products and services that meet the expectations of the end user. We're going to review API 19G1 for side pocket mandrels, 19G2 for flow control devices, 19G3 for running, pulling, kickover tools, and latches, API RP 19G4, which are practices for side pocket mandrels and related equipment. And we're going to review API RP 19 GLHB, which is the gas lift handbook. When an end user sends out a bid request and receives the responses from multiple suppliers, this is what it looks like. When in reality, they're hoping that they can compare apples to apples. The end users need to be able to compare apples to apples for optimal equipment and vendor selection. The benefits that understood requirements bring to the manufacturer is that they need to know that their system is being compared fairly and correctly against others. So what is a standard? A standard is a document that provides requirements, specification, guidelines, and characteristics that can be used consistently to ensure that materials, products, processes, and services are fit for their purpose. So why are artificial lift standards developed? Standards help optimize operations and therefore improve bottom line. The lack of standardized performance ratings and functional tests makes comparisons across manufacturers difficult. Assurance that the equipment performs as it is marketed to do so and supported by sound engineering practices, and the need to establish a common nomenclature and definitions so that everyone is talking the same language. So API has several different types of standards. They are code, a document intended for adoption by regulatory agencies or authorities having just jurisdiction. A specification, a document that prescribes technical requirements to be fulfilled by a product, process, or service. Recommended practices, a document that communicates proven industry practices. A technical report, documents that convey technical information on a specific subject or topic and are generally issued on a one-time basis. So the API standards that apply to gas lift. API Q1, this is a specification for quality management system requirements. It's not just for gas lift, it's for all suppliers of monogrammed equipment, API monogrammed equipment, and it provides for the way that the quality management system will be organized and operated. The API specification G1 for side pocket mandrels, specification G2 flow control devices for side pocket mandrels, specification G3 for running tools, pulling tools, kickover tools, and latches for side pocket mandrels. Recommended practice G4, practices for side pocket mandrel and related equipment. RP, or recommended practice 19 gas lift handbook, or 19G LHB, which is the gas lift handbook, and specification 19G15, which is in process being developed for conventional gas lift equipment. What a standard is not. It is not a contract with the manufacturer. It does not guarantee or become an issue of equipment warranty. For ISO standards and API standards that are adopted an ISO standard, manufacturers are not required to comply unless required by the end user, i.e. end user must invoke the use of standards in practice in bids, tender documents. So what are the potential benefits for end users? So it provides a way to communicate requirements in a standardized format to the manufacturers and then receive a response in a consistent manner. These communication requirements indicate whether the end user is looking for a low-end system, i.e. low cost, or expecting a more premium product, providing an apples to apples comparison. It provides a way to ensure that manufacturers are meeting the same minimum baseline criteria in terms of design validation and various testing procedures. So what are the manufacturer's potential benefits? Standards can be used to segment the market from those who cannot meet the baseline to those who can provide the higher quality and design validation grades. A strategy that may reduce cost is to specify one unit at high levels to ensure supplier has capability, and then order the rest at low levels to minimize cost. This can actually help the large manufacturers compete with companies who do not have the cost burden of quality assurance programs and R&D. So here we're going to see some differences and similarities between ISO and API. So in ISO, the committees are required to have global representation for both manufacturers and end users. In API, the committees do not have to be global, but need to have both manufacturers and end users. The approval process under ISO is a democratic vote by member countries, and it goes through 2 rounds. The approval process in API is by API member companies, with some companies having stronger voting privileges. Under ISO members are the national standards bodies of 165 countries. In API members are corporations ranging from producers to service and supply companies. So the process under ISO for developing a new draft to be published can take up to 18 months to several years. The process for publishing standards or recommended practices can happen in less than 1 year under API. However, this is typically not the case. It's typically 2 years for standards to be generated. A difference between API and ISO is that API produces both RPs, or recommended practices, and standards. ISO has requirements for both end users and manufacturers, and API does similar, but API also offers a monogram program for the manufacturer to monogram the product, which implies that it meets all of the API requirements. So what is the value of the API monogram? So prior to application of monogram, the manufacturer must satisfy the following to be in compliance with API requirements. Must have a current API license that implies the facility has been audited by API and satisfies requirements. Must be subjected to periodic API audits. Must have a quality system that satisfies API Q1 requirements. An organization must conduct all of its quality functions under one system, regardless if products are monogrammed or not. Products must satisfy all of the product-specific requirements in an appropriate specification. Must be applied only in the location that is licensed by API. So the monogram does not guarantee or become an issue of equipment warranty. However, there are means of reporting the manufacturer's failure to satisfy program requirements or monogram requirements to the API. So for ISO standards and API standards that are adopted an ASI standard, manufacturers are not required to comply unless required by end user. So what this means is that any ISO document or co-branded ISO document under ISO, the end user must invoke the use of the standard in the purchase and bid tender documents in order for it to apply directly. For monogram products, there's a high level of reliability that the monogram products meet the API requirements for Q1 and the specific product requirements in question. So this shows the equipment reliability refinements that one obtains with the use of the API Q1 system and the specific standards for the products. So it's a continuous improvement loop, and it helps the company continue to improve. This is built into the API Q1 requirements. So let's talk now about gas lift specifications and recommended practices, and this will be a glance. So the side pocket manual specification, API 19G1, currently it's a 2nd edition. The effective date is February 2019. It's a product specification for side pocket mandrels. Conventional mandrels are not included in the scope of this. So this is the 2nd edition of 19G1. The 1st edition was a co-branded document with ISO 17078-1. The 2nd edition diverges from the 17078-1 And therefore, the 17078-1 document, the ISO document, is outdated and does not include the corrections and refinements that this particular document includes. The hope is that either the ISO will adopt back 19G1 second edition, or they will cancel the 17078-1 document. So the grades, the design validation grades that are offered in this new document are the V3, which is the lowest level of design validation, V2, V1, and V1H. So the V1H is a newly added design validation level, and it enhances the design validation requirements for gas lift mandrels. Similarly, the functional testing requirements, F3, F2, and F1 remain consistent with what's gone before, but the F1H has been added, which has additional product functional testing requirements. Similarly, the quality control requirements have been updated for the Q1H for the high pressure applications. So here we have some additional information under the design validation grades. V1H is the most stringent, V3 is the least stringent. The requirements are scattered throughout annexes B and C. And so here's a roadmap that guides you to the appropriate paragraphs for the particular tests that have to be required. So there's documentation, design review, pressure test to destruction, pressure test at rated temperature, internal pressure cycles, finite element, and so on. Similarly, the product functional testing grades are outlined in terms of a table that guides you to the paragraphs that need to be complied with for the different grade levels that you are trying to work with. And similarly, the quality control grades. So one thing that 19G1 provides is process control. And two of the processes in the fabrication of gas lift mandrels, side pocket mandrels, that are critical are welding and heat treating. So in 19G1 requires the use of ASME code for development of the welding practices and control of the welders and the welding processes. So what that does then is it drives the development of a PQR, which is a procedure qualification record. The welding procedure must be qualified by performing bend tests and tensile tests. The outcome of this procedure qualification record, which, by the way, when the procedure is being welded, the parameters of the welding process are being recorded. That's the amps, the voltages, the feed rates for the wire, the gases that are being utilized, the interpass temperature of the base material, and other factors that affect the quality of the weld. All of this is being recorded and becomes part of the PQR. The PQR requires the tensile test and the bend test. What this does is it validates that the welding procedure is yielding results that are acceptable. The tensile test allows the use of actual material properties. Typically, the weld zone is not the same tensile and yield as the base material because most weld materials are not as high strength as the base materials. The next item is the weld procedure specification. So this is a specification that's generated after the PQR is qualified. The weld procedure specification is what's going to be located at the welding booths and will guide the welders in the process of welding so that they can verify that they're using the right feed rates for the wire, the right gases, the right amps and voltages, and other parameters that are key to a proper weld. The other factor here is the WQR, the welder qualification record. So any welder who welds to a specific specification must qualify the welds to the appropriate WPS. And what this means is that the welder has verified that he is capable of laying weld that meets requirements. As part of this welding qualification, the key is the heat treatment. So the ASME code details what's necessary for heat treatment steps that are to be followed. When a weld is laid in, the base material adjacent to the weld raises above critical temperatures that affect the properties of the microstructure. Without going to the subsequent heat treat, the microstructure in the what's referred to as the heat affected zone and in the weld material can become problematic in terms of its strength of material and its corrosion resistance. So typically, full body heat treatment is a requirement. Once again, it depends on the material that's being welded. So there's a variation here. So either a full body heat treatment that would, like for 4130, would be a normalized quench and temper operation. For other materials, a stress relief of the weld and heat affected zone, either by localized or full body stress relief. So whatever the particular heat treat requirement is, that becomes an element of the fabrication process of that particular product. So here's a pop quiz. How is test pressure defined for a side pocket mandrel that is monogrammed according to API Spec 19G1? Test pressure is 150% of working. Test pressure is 85% of yield pressure. Test pressure is 0.865 times the theoretical yield pressure. Not enough data to answer. Well, there's actually not enough data to answer because we didn't discuss the specifics of test pressure. And in fact, if you look through the document, you will see that the test pressure becomes more specified as you move to the higher levels of design verification. So to truly understand the performance capability of a side pocket mandrel, you need to order at least one according to the design validation grade V1 or V1H. And what will come out of that is this operating envelope. And with this operating envelope, you can determine what the mandrel's capabilities are under different loading conditions: burst, collapse, and tensile compression. So all of this comes into play. And when you do your analysis of your tubing and your components, you can use the stresses that are developed in the tubing program and compare it to this performance capability chart and determine if your product, if the mandrel is going to satisfy your requirements. So the next item we're going to talk about is API 19G2 or flow control devices for side pocket mandrels. So the effective date for this is not too far back. It's March 12th of this year. This is a second edition. So it's a product specification for flow control devices. Now, conventional gas lift valves and external and redundant check systems are out of the scope of this document. So as with 19G1, G2 second edition diverges from the ISO 17078-2. So if you specify 17078-2 as a requirement, then you're getting outdated requirements and possibly confusing requirements because we've corrected some errors in the original document. And then the different grades that are offered here, instead of the V1H option, we have a V0 option, which is the highest grade. The V3 is the lowest. The F0 is the highest grade of product functional testing. F3 is the lowest. And likewise, the quality control requirements Q1 are the highest, Q2 are the lowest. So this is a scavenger hunt, and more so than 19G1. And the requirements are hidden throughout the annex. And this is a list of the annexes that we have. So we have annexes from A to M. And this is this can be confusing. So by having these tables in the document, we facilitate an understanding and a use of the document. So the other thing that's different about this particular standard is that we have numerous flow control device types that we deal with. So we actually have 5 different groups of flow control device types. So we have what most people would know as the standard gas lift valve is the IPO valve. And then there's several choices under that. We have the PPO or production pressure operated valve, or what some people would call the fluid valve. We have the pilot valve. Then we have orifice, venturi nozzle, shear orifice, dump kill. And then we have dummy. So those are the 5 different categories that we are looking at and that we have requirements for. API Spec 19G2 design validation grade and functional testing. So this one table includes both the design validation grades and the product functional testing requirements for each of the different classes of valves. So the Spec 2 has two quality control grades, the basic level of flow control device and the highest level. You can read here what the requirements are. So let's move on to 19G3, running tools, pulling tools, and kickover tools, latches for side pocket mandrels. So the effective date of this document is June of 2011. It's a product specification for side pocket mandrel accessory equipment. And you can see the different grades that we offer. Now, this particular document currently is co-branded by API and ISO. This is the ISO 17078-3. And it's a API 19G3. So the document is identical between both of those bodies, but the difference is that API adds an annex that allows for the monogram program to be utilized. So there's two basic design validation grades. There's the V2 and the V1. The V1 is the highest, and V2 requires much less in terms of validation. In fact, successful service is one of the requirements. V1 requires actual testing. So if I were out there ordering equipment to 19G3, I would insist on the V1 status because then there would be some actual testing performed. Similarly, the functional testing is higher for the F1 grade. One of the main differences is that on the F2 grade, you do a 5% test, functional test, and on the F2 grade, you do a 5% test. On the F1 grade, you do 100% of the job lot. And this particular document has environmental service grades. Typically, you can specify standard service, an H2S or sour service, CO2 service, or unique service. We've done away with this on the 19G1 and 19G2 documents. We found that it was too cumbersome and didn't work well because, let's say for H2S or sour service, some materials work fine in H2S under certain sets of conditions, and under other sets of conditions, it doesn't work well. The same for CO2 service. So we decided that there were too many variables and we were working to remove this, and this will probably be removed at the next revision level of this document. Two basic quality control grades. This is for G3. Okay, for 19G4, this is an RP, a recommended practice. So this is not a mandatory item to be followed. Its effective date is June 2011, and it also is still co-branded. It's a 19G4 document and a 17078-4 ISO document. So here's the table of content for the document. We're not going to go through it. What we are going to do, we're not going to go through each of these forms, but we want to show you the forms that a user purchaser will use to tell the vendor the type of side pocket mandrel he wants. So this details the information that the user purchaser can complete that will guide the supplier manufacturer in developing or identifying a product that meets the user purchaser's requirements. Similarly, we have the same thing for gas lift valves. And we also have the same thing for accessories. This would be for your G3 equipment. The supplier manufacturer also has some tables in here or some information. And what this is the information that a supplier manufacturer will or should report to the user purchaser on his product. Same story for the valves. This is a detailed list of the characteristics that the supplier manufacturer should be reporting to the user purchaser, and also on the 19G3 equipment for running, pulling, kickover tools, and latches accessories. So in June of 2020, the 19G Gas Lift Handbook has been released. This Gas Lift Handbook basically replaces the multiple recommended practices that were under the 19G banner. It improves the delivery of information and eliminates duplication of basic information. Each of the different the RPs that were developed included some grounding information on the front end that was quite often the same from document to document. So by putting it all together in a handbook, what we've done is we've eliminated the duplicity of those types of topics. We've also, the format allows for inclusion of additional topics as appropriate, and there are, we're working right now to incorporate additional topics into the Gas Lift Handbook. Here's the table of content. I'm not going to go through it all the way, but the handbook is intended to standardize terms, definitions, abbreviations, and symbols. This is a big issue. Even within standards and RPs, we were having variations in these items in the 19G test group. It provides information on gas lift principles, operations, and designs. And so I'm not going to go through the rest of those, but it's all of the RPs that we previously had under the 19G banner are factored in or included in this particular document. It's quite a comprehensive document. So this proceeding is entirely the views of the author and is not sanctioned by API, ISO, or ALRDC. I hope that you found it useful. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to contact me, Wayne Mabry, at mabrywayne@yahoo.com. Thank you for your time.